Hello there, live from Washington. This is BBC News. A Hamas spokesperson is among dozens killed by the Israeli military as it ramps up attacks on Gaza City ahead of a planned takeover. The United Nations in Yemen says Houthis have detained at least 11 of its staff in raids on offices in the capital Sana'a. And Xi Jinping hosts leaders including Vladimir Putin and Narendra Modi at a regional security summit. Hello, I'm Rich Preston. Welcome to the programme, and we begin in Gaza, where Hamas says an Israeli strike on a residential building in Gaza City has killed several civilians. Israel says the aerial attack killed the spokesperson for Hamas. Local journalists reported that at least 7 people had been killed and 20 injured in the strikes, and said that children were among the casualties. The Israel Defense Forces said it had attacked, quote, a key terrorist in Gaza City's Al-Rimal neighborhood on Saturday. In a post on X, Israel's Defense Minister, Israel Katz, congratulated the Israeli army for the raid that killed Abu Udeida. Hamas has not yet confirmed his death. Israeli forces have in recent days intensified their attacks on Gaza City before a planned operation to seize control and occupy it. Emir Nader has more from Jerusalem.
Al-Hudhaifa al-Kahlout, better known by his nom de guerre Abu Ubaida, was the military spokesperson for Hamas for nearly 20 years, known for giving these very lengthy, eloquent diatribes against Israel and the occupation. He'd become known across the Middle East as really one of the most prominent figures from Hamas's military wing. Just on Friday, he'd given his last speech in which he warned Israel against its planned invasion of Gaza City, saying that the fate of the Israeli hostages remaining in Gaza will be the same as that of Hamas fighters. His killing will be a significant blow to Hamas, a symbolic blow. We've been speaking to some residents from Gaza City who described the terrifying series of Israeli airstrikes on an apartment block in Gaza City. And we've seen some of the aftermath, the videos of the street filled with dust, chaos, children covered in blood. The Israeli Minister of Defense praised the Israeli military and intelligence for what he called a flawless operation, but we understand that at least 7 people were killed and 20 injured, and including the injured and the casualties, we understand children to be among them.
Well, pro-Palestinian activists, including the climate and political campaigner Greta Thunberg, are sailing towards Gaza in a large protest flotilla. This was their departure earlier from Barcelona, with more than 200 campaigners from 44 different countries taking part. The organisers say the flotilla is the largest ever to set sail for the territory. In June, Israeli naval forces boarded a flotilla carrying Ms. Thunberg, who was later deported along with other activists. This mission will also not be allowed to land in Gaza, as Israel has imposed a naval blockade on the territory. Before she set off, Ms. Thunberg told a press conference in Barcelona that more and more people are waking up to what she said are atrocities taking place in Gaza.
The question here today is not why we are sailing. This story is not at all about the mission that we are about to embark. The story here is about Palestine. The story here is how people are being deliberately deprived of the very basic means to survive.
There's one other update we want to bring you from the region, and the Washington Post is reporting that it's obtained post-war plans for Gaza that are circulating within the Trump administration. The Post says it's reviewed a 38-page proposal to bring Gaza under US administration and then, quote, voluntarily relocate its population of about 2 million. The territory would then be rebuilt into a resort and technology hub. The plan echoes President Trump's earlier vow to take over and redevelop Gaza into what he called the Riviera of the Middle East, a statement which was widely condemned. The for-profit plan suggests offering land and property owners in Gaza a digital token in exchange for granting developers rights to rebuild. Palestinians with a token could then redeem it for cash payments and subsidies to live outside Gaza, Alternatively, they could stay in a restricted zone within Gaza and eventually redeem the token for a new apartment. Well, joining us now is Michael Link, who served as the UN Special Rapporteur for the human rights situation in the Palestinian territories. Mr. Link, thank you very much for being with us. I'd like to begin, if I may, by asking you about this report in the Washington Post. What do you make of these plans circulating within Donald Trump's administration to relocate Palestinians and take over the territory?
This, I think, becomes the Palestinians' biggest fear. And virtually in every Palestinian's mind, they remember 1948-49 and the exile of 750,000 Palestinians who were never allowed to return to their homes in what became Israel. Another 300,000 then were displaced in 1967, not allowed to return. So now you're looking at a range of 2 million Palestinians in Gaza who are going to be expected under this particular plan to be removed from the Gaza Strip, and likely most of them will never be able to return. I can't imagine this has much international support. Indeed, where there is support is for a plan that was announced several months ago by Egypt, which would see a international peacekeeping force enter into Gaza, Israel to withdraw all of its troops, and for the international community, guided by these Arab troops and probably largely by Arab money, to rebuild Gaza for the Palestinians who wind up living there. The fact that it has very little international support, the fact that it doesn't involve the Palestinians at all in a say in what their future would be in Gaza or who would wind up ruling them, all of it, I think, pertains to a plan that's bound to fail.
Certainly, as you say, echoes of the past in this plan. And I want to ask you about the regional players here. You mentioned Egypt, other countries like Lebanon, Jordan as well also have a stake in this. What are different countries vying for? What do they want? And equally importantly, what do they not want?
Well, they don't want to see the displacement of the Palestinians, both because that's what the Palestinians don't want themselves. I think most Arab countries would line up with Palestinian popular opinion, but they also don't want to see, if you like, the burden of taking in more Palestinian refugees who would then not be able to return to their homes in the Palestinian territory, and then would be a further burden. Remember that somewhere between a third and a half of Jordan's population are made up of Palestinians exiles from 1948 and 1967. There are large Palestinian exile communities, refugee communities in Syria and in Lebanon as well. None of this has been good for those countries. All of these Palestinians wish to find some way of returning to their homes and their homeland, even after roughly 80 years of exile. And I think that's what you probably would see among the broad Arab support in the street right across the Middle East. And while most Arab countries are ruled by dictators, I think they have to pay attention to popular opinion within their own countries.
Mr. Link, Israel has said throughout this conflict that its goal remains to defeat Hamas. This latest strike has apparently killed the Hamas military spokesperson as well as several civilians. Can Israel ultimately defeat Hamas? Is there an achievable end goal here?
I don't think there is. And I think you'll find most knowledgeable observers of Middle East politics, even those who are formally within the Israeli security service, wind up saying it's going to be impossible to defeat Hamas. Hamas apparently has replaced most of the fighters that it's lost over the last 23 months. And more than simply Hamas as a fighting force, it's an idea. And Hamas draws its support not only from Palestinians in Gaza, but Palestinians elsewhere, because it shows like this militant opposition to forever occupation that the rest of the world says is unlawful and should have ended a long time ago. As long as Israel has plans to annex the Palestinian territory, to rule and to continue to subjugate the Palestinians, then we're going to see Hamas or organizations like Hamas continuing to flourish. If there is a genuine diplomatic and political path to this, I would think you see most of the air in Hamas's balloon wind up seeping out.
Okay, Michael Link, former UN Special Rapporteur for Human Rights Situation in the Palestinian territories. Mr. Link, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now, the United Nations says Houthis in Yemen have arrested at least 11 of its staff in coordinated raids on UN offices in the capital Sana'a and the port city of Hodeidah. The UN's Yemen envoy condemned what he called the arbitrary detentions, the forced entry into UN premises, and the seizure of property. The Houthis have reportedly accused UN personnel of collaborating with Israel, a claim the United Nations has strongly denied. The arrests come days after Israeli airstrikes killed the Houthis' prime minister and several senior officials. Earlier on, I spoke to Ambassador Marwan Ali Noman, senior fellow at the Washington Center for Yemeni Studies and former deputy permanent representative of Yemen to the UN. If I can begin, Mr. Ambassador, by asking you first of all about this raid by the Houthis on United Nations offices. At least 11 UN staff taken, apparently, arrested by Houthis. What's your reaction to this?
Thank you very much for having me. Actually, this is not the first raid that the Houthi militia arrested UN agencies and international organizations, also workers in Yemen. It happened before. A few months ago, also arrested many of UN employees in Sana'a, Hodeidah, and other cities. So this is not new. What happened is actually this campaign came after the recent airstrike had the Houthi leader gathering in Sana'a last Thursday. So, of course, the accusation is ready made by the Houthis that those workers either are spy or working for the enemy, which is here is Israel and the United States. So this is another campaign by the Houthis against the UN workers, employees, but also in the past, it targeted the foreign embassies in place in Sana'a, the U.S., some of the U.S. employees and the Netherlands embassy as well. And until now, those people are still in custody, and many of the calls by the UN, by the international community to release those arrested innocent people, still receive death years by the Houthis.
You mentioned earlier on these strikes that we've seen in the last couple of weeks. What's causing this violence to escalate? Is this about to spiral out of control?
Exactly. I mean, the strikes and counter strikes between Houthis and Israel has been continued for some time. But actually, what is a turning point, I would say, this time was when the Houthis last Friday, I believe, on the 22nd of August, struck Israel with a missile, with a cluster-tipped missile. This is a new missile that Houthis are using now against Israel. In that regard, the retaliation by Israel actually took a new approach, which targeted now the Houthi, some of the Houthi leaders. It actually targeted a gathering was by the Houthi so-called government and the cabinet members, and the casualties was huge. It included the prime minister of the Houthi government, including other ministers, the foreign minister, and others. The news coming from Sana'a indicate that almost all the cabinet members have been killed or injured, except for those four actually didn't attend that gathering in Sana'a.
How much does this slow down or even stop the Houthis?
I don't think that this will stop them. On the contrary, they will try to escalate from their side for many reasons, including supporting their narrative locally and regionally that they are fighting Israel on behalf of the Arab and Muslim world. This is first, but also internally, it will help them recruit more people to their war, but also it will be used as a tool to coercively repress the Yemeni people inside the areas they control.
Now, the world's two most populous nations, China and India, say they want to be partners, not rivals, after years of tensions driven by a border dispute. Their leaders, Narendra Modi and Xi Jinping, met on the sidelines of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit being held in Tianjin. President Xi described the meeting as the dragon and the elephant coming together. It's Mr. Modi's first time in China in 7 years. Russia's President Vladimir Putin is also there, along with more than 20 world leaders, many of whom are experiencing growing diplomatic tensions with the West, including the leaders of Belarus and Iran. Well, this meeting kicks off a week of major events for the Chinese president, who will oversee a military parade in the capital, Beijing, later this week. China now has the ability to build the equivalent of an entire British Royal Navy fleet every 4 years, according to military experts, and now has the largest maritime force in the world. Our China correspondent Laura Bicker has this report.
China, not the US, has made shipbuilding great again. This country builds 200 ships at the same rate the US builds one, which has turned this yard in Dalian into a tourist destination and a source of national pride.
After coming here and seeing the big ships, I found them really amazing.
Do you see the ships every day?
Yes, I've been live streaming here every day. Shipbuilding companies bring job opportunities and lots of welfare benefits to Dalian residents.
China has been invaded by sea more than 470 times in its history. And that's why President Xi has vowed that his country will never again be humiliated in that way by foreign forces. In the last decade, his government has ploughed money into shipbuilding and created the largest navy in the world. At a nearby port, once taken by the Japanese and run by the Russians, you get just a glimpse of this country's growing maritime might. China launched a new warship earlier this month, an assault vessel to take troops from the sea to the shore. This country has far fewer aircraft carriers and submarines than the US, but that is changing, and fast. Final rehearsals ahead of this week's military parade have focused on troop formations, but new underwater drones and hypersonic weapons will also be on show. Some fear this build-up is preparation for an attack on the self-governing island of Taiwan. But China is keen to tell the world not to worry.
China already has the capacity to take Taiwan back. China doesn't do that because we have patience. We have patience to wait. And China has never given up the peaceful unification.
These shipyards are a playground for some and a nightmare for others. The fear in Washington is that this view forms part of a global power shift in the making. Laura Bicker, BBC News, Dalian.
Well, joining us live now is Jack Burnham, research analyst at the Foundation for the Defence of Democracy's China programme. Jack, good to talk to you. Let's talk about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization then. We've got Modi, Putin meeting with Xi Jinping there, the dragon and elephant coming together. I think dancing together was one translation I heard. This is rife with symbolism. What message does this send to the West?
I think it shows a clear message in which there's a rhetorical flair coming between Modi, Xi, Putin, and others. In particular, I think it's meant to showcase China's ability to choreograph some of what it perceives to be some of its partners or potential partners. But I certainly wouldn't read too much into looking at some of the underlying tensions that continue between the Modi-Xi relationship, and that includes China's support for Pakistan as well as recent border clashes.
Interesting that you bring up Pakistan there, what does each leader, those three key ones, want to get out of this?
I think it's certainly a case for China that sees Pakistan as both an economic lever as well as a certain special military ally, particularly as a great customer for China's growing indigenous domestic military capabilities. Obviously, between India and Pakistan is a great deal of tension. And I think so long as China continues to be a major player within Pakistan's military modernization efforts, including selling the types of weapons that Pakistan used to target Indian assets in both countries' latest wave of attacks, that will certainly continue to be an irritant going forward.
How close are Chinese and Russian relationships at the moment?
I would certainly say that China and Russia's relationship is far more than a passing dalliance and looking more like a long-term strategic relationship that's been forming. I think that that's been key across Putin's continuation of his war in Ukraine, of both being financed by Chinese oil purchases, being supplied by Chinese microelectronics, and being fueled via innovation through joint Chinese-Russian partnerships to develop new types of technologies, particularly drones.
This is a regular meeting. They get together often and frequently in communication with each other. But how much of a message is this to the West? How much of a muscle flex is this to Washington, to London, to Paris?
I certainly think it's a case in which, particularly for Modi, the timing of this type of meeting is significant. It's been 7 years since he entered China. It's been 5 years since recent brutal border clashes between India and China. And I certainly think that Modi is feeling some pressure from the West, particularly from Washington, over oil purchases from Russia. And I certainly think that it's a case of being sure to make a rhetorical flourish while perhaps trying to not stray too far from what he sees as a significant backer, the United States, both in terms of potential economic ties, putting aside current tariff disputes, as well as defense ties. The United States and India are both growing in terms of their defense relationship. India is a major defense partner of the United States. Indian manufacturers play key roles in U.S. defense industrial base relationships. So I certainly think it's a case with Modi attempting to balance some of the concern that he feels about being pushed around from Washington, while also making sure to maintain some type of semblance of relationship with the West.
Okay, Jack Burnham from the Foundation for Defense of Democracy's China program. Jack, thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Well, sticking with the military theme, and the UK has staved off rival bids from the US, France and Germany to seal a £10 billion deal to supply warships to Norway. Under the agreement, the British firm BAE Systems will build at least 5 anti-submarine frigates in Glasgow to form part of a joint fleet with Norway. Norway's Prime Minister has said it's the biggest ever defence procurement. Here's Joe Inwood.
Russia poses many security questions for the West. In the North Sea, these are the UK's answer. This computer-generated footage shows Type 26 frigates, specially designed to detect, track and, if necessary, defeat submarines. The UK had already commissioned 8 of them. Now, the news that Norway will buy 5 more.
This is the biggest British warship deal in history. It's a huge vote of confidence in British workers and the British defence industry, securing 4,000 jobs for the next 15 years and beyond, including 2,000 in Scotland, where these warships will be built.
BAE Systems is already constructing HMS Glasgow, due to be at sea by 2028. The government say all 8 British ships and the 5 Norwegian will be finished by the mid-2030s. They claim the expanded order will not result in delays, although HMS Glasgow is already behind schedule. The UK and Norway are close allies. Their forces have trained together for many years. That alliance was crucial in beating rival bids from France, Germany and the US.
We have asked 2 fundamental questions. Who's the best strategic partner for Norway when purchasing new frigates? And can the country that is the best partner for us deliver a competitive frigate? The answer to the first question is the United Kingdom. And the answer to the second is yes. Overall, this is the best frigate for Norway.
Russian submarines in the North Sea have been identified as a key strategic threat to the UK and her allies. Today's announcement is their response to that challenge. But it will be many years before it is fully operational. Joe Inwood, BBC News.
Let's take a quick look at some other stories this hour. And Indonesia's president says he'll cut some perks for politicians after weeks of mass demonstrations amid a cost of living crisis. Prabowo Subianto said some of the unrest where homes of politicians had been looted, amounted to treason and terrorism. He said the police and army would take strong action. And a US judge has blocked plans to deport hundreds of Guatemalan children. The order follows an emergency request from immigrant rights groups calling the plans illegal. The children between 10 and 17 arrived in America alone and are currently in custody. Lawyers say they were being repatriated without a chance to contest the deportations. The White House has described it as a pilot program taking place with the Guatemalan government's cooperation. And before we leave you, the state of South Australia is to become the first place in the world to ban fish-shaped soy sauce containers. The tiny plastic holders were invented in Japan in the 50s and are a popular staple at many Asian restaurants and takeaways around the world. But the state's environment minister said the size of the polyethylene fish means they end up frequently being discarded and fall under a wider ban on single-use plastics. It's thought billions of the little fish have been produced around the world. Much more still to come. Do stick with us on BBC News.